a close and frustrating loss this afternoon, but they're still in the thick of the fight for first place in the Metropolitan Division. Hunter Hodies of Locked On Penguins joins us to talk about the Penguins as we get closer to the trade deadline.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, welcome back to the Monday edition of the Locked On NHL podcast. Gil Martin, glad to be with you, and thank you for making Locked On NHL your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms. Right now, my pleasure to welcome back to the show Hunter Hodies, the host of Locked On Penguins. And Hunter, a tough loss this afternoon. So close, and yet, what happened out there?
Yeah, I mean, Carolina, we all know how good they are. That's probably them and Pittsburgh, I think, at the top of the Metro. And, obviously that's where the standings are. But I still think even if those two teams were below, say, a New York or a Washington, I think those two teams are the cream of the crop. Pittsburgh got off to a bit of a slow start today, which is kind of the norm, I would say, for their afternoon game skill. They just, for whatever reason, they get off on the wrong foot. Carolina goes up 1-0, and then 9 seconds into the second period, it's 2-0. But the Penguins made a push after about the 5 or 10 minute mark of the second period, and that's what happens. I think when two great teams play each other, part of the game is going to be dominated by one team, and the other team is going to make a push. And the Penguins did that. Brian Rust scores another goal. He's continuing his pace of going to get paid this summer. Sidney Crosby was able to tee up a slapper that it is a vintage one. As I love when he does those, even though he doesn't do them as often. It's still great when he does. They tie it, but they got off on the wrong footing at the beginning of the third. They allow another goal within 10 seconds. That's actually the first time in NHL history today that a team scored a goal within 10 seconds of back-to-back periods. And of course it happens against the Penguins, so do you know. And then there are just, I think, too many defensive roles. Brian Dumoulin didn't have that good of a game today. The power play really struggled, and it's been struggling, I think, for the last couple of weeks. But, they made a nice push at the end. Rodriguez scores. Sid almost scores at the buzzer. The team is going to be fine. I think, I was frustrated myself today. I know a lot of other fans are as well, but they just won 4 in a row before this 2-game losing streak. I'm sure in another week or two, they're going to start to win some more games, though. I will say they're going to have to run the gauntlet here because they have one of the hardest schedules remaining, but they're going to see this team moving forward. And I will say as well, if these two teams play in the playoffs, it's going 7 games.
It would be a spectacular series to see, no question about that. How do you try to remedy these slow starts and these little defensive breakdowns that you're talking about?
Yeah, I think, as Brian Rust said it today, it's just kind of, attention to the detail, making sure we're just, we're getting started on time. And, they weren't reading the play, I think, as they should have. I think on the first one that was within 9 seconds, Jordan Saul just got a really lucky bounce. And, that happens all the time in the NHL. He goes to the net, though, which was good, but went off, I believe, his skate or something like that. Excuse me. And then Tristan wasn't able to quell it. The one that made it 3-2 one. That can't happen just because I know Nino Niederreiter had a great pass, but Brian Dumoulin is kind of just had his head kind of turned, and he's not realizing that Jesper Fast is coming in on the other side, and he just has to play that better. His partner Chris Letang is boxing out his man in front of the net. He's doing his job. The forward is doing his job watching Niederreiter, but Dumoulin was not. So it's just, again, I really think it's the attention to the details there. If that doesn't happen, who knows what happens in the third, because I thought the Penguins had a really nice push after that goal. It was just, Antti Ranta played great. And, sometimes you win these and you lose these. And, again, I'm sure the Penguins will probably win one of their 2 remaining games against Carolina, but just some defensive lapses really screw them. And they got to be ready to play at the start of these periods.
Are you at all concerned that Tristan Jarry is getting too much work and won't be sharp for the stretch drive in the playoffs?
I am. Yes. I think the backup goaltending spot needs to be addressed. I don't really think Casey DeSmith has played well this year. I think any Penguins fan or anyone that covers the team will say that they need to go out, I think, at the deadline and get a backup. There's going to be quite a few goalies out there. No, that does not mean a Marc-Andre Fleury reunion. That I think would just screw a lot of things up, and they also can't afford his cap hit. So that's not going to happen. But there's Yaroslav Halak, of course, former Islander, but I think he might be wanting to stay in Vancouver. There's the ultimate hilarious one if Braden Holtby were to go from Dallas to Pittsburgh, because obviously he was in Washington for so many years. There's not going to be any shortage of options. They have to address it. It stinks that Louis Domingue has been out for so long, because he had a really nice debut and it was looking like, okay, he could give them maybe close to league average goaltending, but the fact of the matter is DeSmith has not gotten it done. He had 2 good starts in a row prior to the one in Philly, and I think Sullivan was sending this message saying, okay, if you continue this, we may not have to go out and get a goalie, but he basically was the main reason I think they almost lost that game. But, Tristan, I think he has played the second most games in the league this year behind Andrei Vasilevsky. You got to rest him at some point. He's been fantastic. He's top 5 in goals saved above expected. In my view, he's probably a Vezina finalist as we stand today. But, I mean, you're going to ride him to the ditch if he continues to start every game. He's not going to be, fresh for the playoffs. Luckily, the Penguins have some breaks in action coming up, so he'll be able to get some rest. But I still think even with this hard schedule down the stretch, and there will be some back-to-backs, they need a goalie other than Tristan that they can rely on to win those games and not just, give them away, basically.
What else do you think the Penguins will look to add at the trade deadline, and what are they willing to give up?
Yeah, I think, a lot of the fan base, myself included, on the podcast, I've just been touching on, I think they need an impact forward. Kasperi Kapanen hasn't gotten it done this year. Jason Zucker's been out, and I think he'll probably be out until the trade deadline, if not a little past that, with his hernia that he had surgery on a couple of weeks ago. I believe that was a 6 to 8 week timeline, if I recall correctly. But it's just there's too many. I shouldn't say passengers, but there's a couple of them in the lineup, as I just mentioned, and I think if this team were to get another impact forward, I don't know if it would put them over the top, but it would make them, even that much a stronger team. Brock Besser, Vancouver, Connor Garland from there. Somehow if Dallas wants to trade Joe Pavelski or something like that. Now, what will the Penguins give up? I honestly don't really mind. I mean, this is probably the best team they've had, I think, since the 2017 Cup run. I know they were really good last year, but I think when healthy, they're deeper than that. I think their defense is much better. The goaltending has obviously been really good starting-wise. When you are in win now and you are towards the end of your win now tenure and the team is going to be bad pretty soon, you go all in no matter what. I know they've won 3 championships, but, they're still hungry for more. They want to be, the best dynasty to come of this generation with 4 Stanley Cups. And if that means moving the first rounder, you do it. If that means moving, Sam Poulin, Nathan Legary, or Philip Hollander, you do it, or whatever else it takes. So I think the Penguins should be more aggressive than some other teams in getting a forward at the deadline, but I'm not sure it's Ron Hextall's MO to do that, just because, I mean, he evaluates his team, but he's also very quiet about, what he looks for and all that. He's not usually someone to make a blockbuster trade, as we saw in Philadelphia. So I'm curious to see what he does, but if they can add another, just any pure winger for Evgeny Malkin, just because his line mates have been cycled all throughout since he came back, I think that would be really big.
Hunter, why don't you tell our listeners where they could find your podcast and where they could find you on social media?
Yeah, so you can find the Locked On Penguins podcast on wherever you get podcasts, Apple, Spotify, now YouTube, which has been the case for, I believe, 2.5 months now. We're almost to 100 subscribers, which is perfect. That's my short-term goal. Obviously, long-term goal is to get way more than that. You can follow me on Twitter at Hunter Hodies, and the show's Twitter is at LO_Penguins.
All right, Hunter, thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me.